Um, I'm going to start off with an apology. Sort of the talk will be somewhat brief, but that's because the first buoy went in the water a week and a half ago, and I have sort of very minimal amounts of data to actually show you. So it's more a matter of sort of here's what I'm up to, and I'm excited to sort of try to find a way to get more people involved in it. So select the right piece here. All right. So I'll start off sort of talking about just like who I am, so you have an idea, sort of sense of who you're talking to. Give an idea of what I'm doing in the reserve, and just talk about sort of what my hopes are sort of going forward with the project, both sort of short term and sort of longer term, and how sort of I could sort of engage with you and sort of other citizen scientists in doing the work. So picture I'm showing you here, like this is the beach that was by my house when I was growing up as a kid. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, so like I've been sort of living near and by ports for a large portion of my life. I also actually sort of later on sort of I actually lived, this is me, I lived down in Long Beach, so closer to sort of to your neck of the woods. And now this is where I call roughly home now. In fact, if you see this building, which looks like sort of has like lines sort of going out from Mid Central Point, that's actually the physics building. That's a sundial. I am literally in that building right now. I have nicer microphones and nicer cameras here, so I thought it would work out well. Sadly, I don't have students here, even though classes started yesterday, which is a very weird feeling. But so I can be physically distant because no one is in my building. It's an odd time we live in. Anyway. On a more sort of professional level, so I actually, from Seattle, I came down to Southern California. I got my bachelor's and master's degree sort of in the area. I went up to Oregon where I got my PhD. After that, I went out to what I will call the East Coast of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and did some work that actually related to the Southern Ocean there before returning to Southern California, where I am here at the University of Redlands. Give you sort of things I've done. I've done some field research, both sort of off the Oregon coast, in Massachusetts Bay, so sort of in coastal environments. I've also sort of, this is me putting instruments down into what is 6,000 meters of water. So I've been sort of coastal and in deep water oceans. And then for my postdoc, like I said, we actually took measurements from aircraft over the Southern Ocean. And we're actually measuring the composition of the air and trying to estimate how much of various gases were being exchanged with the surface ocean, and by sort of tracing it back. In addition to sort of field research, I've done a lot of computational work. This is probably the best computational picture I have, which is why I sort of show it. This is from my PhD, where I was modeling how very small organisms swim in turbulence. So the color is basically which direction they're swimming. So what happens, there's a lot of organisms basically have sort of a diel migration. They swim up and down in the water column, up and down once a day. And what I was modeling sort of is how the various sort of levels of flow in the ocean. So the ocean's not uniform. Various levels will flow in different directions. And so what's pictured here on the top, you can imagine like the water sort of drifting off to the right. On the bottom, the water's drifting off to the left. At the place where those two layers interface, you get sort of interesting sort of turbulent billows. And so you see sort of at the interface, the poor little swimmers get tumbled around. Imagine sort of like two conveyor belts. If you had 1 foot on each conveyor belt, you just spin. And so here the two poor little swimmers get tilted off the direction they're going. And so in addition to that, I've done some modeling of sort of wind and wave, the mixing that winds and waves do out in the open ocean. And I did some modeling associated with the aircraft work to try and actually estimate how much of various gases were going into and out of the ocean based on the concentrations that were measured there. So to focus back on sort of what's actually sort of happening in Bolsa Chica, so in consultation with California Fish and Wildlife, I sort of explored the idea of putting up a sort of moored array of instruments to try to measure sort of the properties of the water at various locations in the estuary. And sort of after taking a tour of the location of a real estuary, there's about sort of 3 distinct regions of the estuary that might sort of help characterize what's going on and what sort of processes are happening. One basically between the footbridge and the Warner Avenue Bridge, sort of basically telling you what kind of water is coming into the estuary or leaving the estuary as the tide goes in and out. One sort of at the confluence, sort of where the tide gates and the culvert into the pocket estuary and the culvert that goes into the inner Bolsa Bay all connect. Sort of seeing sort of what the water properties are there, and then one over in inner Bolsa Bay. So here's sort of a map showing roughly where sort of those would be. So right, sort of the Warner Avenue buoy would be up here. Here's sort of right, here's where the three basins kind of meet, and then one out in here. And sort of, so this is sort of what the buoys look like when they're under construction. And I think I'm actually going to, yeah, let's do this. Let's do that, and I'll do that. So this is actually sort of what's hanging on the buoys. So this is the instrument housing. It's literally a 2-inch piece of galvanized pipe. And the reason sort of this is linked up between the chains. The temperature logger is this small little piece of plastic. And so so to protect it from sort of being overly sort of chafed or damaged by the chain, it actually sits inside the pipe, and it's wired and protected in there. In addition, I have sort of these other instruments. This is actually a pressure logger. This essentially allows you to measure the water depth at the buoy. So this sits toward the bottom of the chain, and it's just simply strapped alongside, because unlike the chain, right, this is nice and rigid, and so it isn't going to try to bend this in half when it's sort of locked to it. So sort of that's the rough idea of sort of what's in the water. Go back to sharing the screen. So obviously the chain I just sort of buy off the shelf, but the housings actually had to be built by students. So I've had sort of I had students last summer, because I started corresponding with various sort of areas where I could put buoys in. So I've had sort of students working on that. Let me push the right button. So a week ago, so the same student who built the housings came out and met me out in Bolsa Chica a week ago, I think that's right. And we went out and we actually deployed the first mooring. So it took a little more effort than I thought it would. It took us about 2 hours to actually go from the fishing beach here to returning to the fishing beach with the mooring fully deployed. So it was a good sort of proof of concept. The buoy that's in there, so here's sort of the other side of the river. On that mooring there is a sensor that measures the surface pressure. So basically the same thing like the pressure you get when you see the weather report. There are 7 temperature sensors at various locations down the chain. And then basically every other temperature sensor has along with it a salinity sensor. So I can sort of get an idea sort of how salty the water is at the surface, how salty the water is toward the middle of the depths, and how salty the water is toward the bottom. Turns out that temperature is a lot cheaper to measure than salinity. And so that's sort of what's going on there. And then I'm looking to sort of put a buoy in the confluence. That buoy is sort of still being constructed. The start of classes has taken over my time. And another buoy I'm going to try and put somewhere past, this is the inner Bolsa Bay. This is the plume coming from the culvert on inner Bolsa Bay. So somewhere downstream of that, I'd like to put a buoy. Before I could even put the buoys in, actually Kelly and I went out and did a survey of outer Bolsa Bay, and measured sort of typical depths so I could estimate sort of how much chain I need to attach to the bottom of the buoy. We measured sort of that the depth over towards the Warner Avenue Bridge, it's down to sort of 4 meters. The main channel in the outer Bolsa Bay is sort of typically 2 meters, more or less. And then in that basin where the tide gates and the 2 culverts converge, it actually goes back down to about you get an extra meter of depth, so it's about 3 meters depth or more in there. And then on the same day, so a couple weeks later, I went back to deploy the first mooring. After deploying the mooring, we then drove up to Inner Bolsa Bay and we did a short survey. We only made it to the sort of the very narrow part, so halfway, not even halfway down, maybe a quarter of the way down. And we were surveying down there, and that portion of the bay, there's actually a deep pocket near the culvert that actually gets down to about 3 meters, but the majority of the bay is about 1.5 meters deep. As you get close to this narrow portion, it does get a little deeper. You get, 2, maybe 2.5 meters. So I'm debating moving this mooring closer toward that narrow point, sort of the actual deployment. So here's the 4-meter area, and then this is sort of, my suspicion is sort of these outflows from the culverts actually help sort of carve deeper channels and sort of maintain a deeper region in that area. That I just is in terms of stuff in the water, not even. And so what I want to do, what I hope to do is, so the gear that we use to actually do the surveys is really simple. We have a cheap little LCD GPS, a simple, that red thing looks like a flashlight. It's actually a depth sounder. And it actually measures not only depth, but also measures the surface temperature of the water. And so what I'd like to do in addition to having the buoys there is through sort of even irregular data taking, but having a long enough sort of record of enough area of the bay, people measuring position, depth, temperature, and when you take it, we can actually sort of, from that, we could actually back out, since the tides are this nice sinusoidal, predictable, we know the frequency of the tide, even if we don't know how big it is. We can actually sort of back out from that the actual tidal range, the actual sort of tidal dynamics inside the estuary. And so we can actually sort of see how we can remove that from the signal that you get when you go out and measure water depth, and get both the bathymetry of the bay sort of having the tide sort of removed, and get a sense of how quickly the tide propagates up from the Warner Bridge up through the culvert and up into the inner bay. And so this is sort of my hope going forward, is finding a way to sort of get more than just me and a student going out and collecting time, location, and depth information. And sort of bigger sense, sort of what I hope to sort of get from this project is actually sort of understanding the dynamics of sort of this large, shallow bay in what is actually a pretty sort of dynamic environment, right? In the summertime, like, it's warm, it's dry, and it turns out sort of in a warm enough and dry enough place, you can actually get what's called a reverse estuary. This idea that the closest sort of big example is the Gulf of California, right? Between Baja and mainland Mexico, right? You get enough surface evaporation that the water actually becomes salty, so salty that it will then sink to the bottom. And so you get outflow at the bottom of the estuary and inflow of fresher water from the ocean coming back in. And so I'm curious sort of if there's enough evaporation going on in either the inner bay or in the whole sort of complex of the two or three basins to actually sort of, so enough fresh water evaporates so you actually could get sort of a change in dynamics. The fact that you have this massive flood control channel that sort of empties out into the middle of the bay, I think actually could, in the wintertime, sort of there could be really interesting sort of short-term events where you get this pulse of fresh water flowing through the estuary, and sort of get an idea sort of how strong that influence really is, like how big of a change does it actually cause. And another question I have is sort of how does that propagate back up into Inner Bolsa Bay through that culvert? Does that culvert do a good job of sort of protecting that inner bay from strong changes in salinity, or do both bays just simply go really fresh when you get a strong rain event? On the smaller scale, I'm actually curious just to how much stirring those turbulent plumes do. Right, sort of like I assume, so you've all been out there, you've seen sort of the big sort of rolling water sort of coming out of those plumes, sort of how much how much energy that's going through there is actually causing, sort of is homogenizing the water, so that what's actually in either outer bay or the inner bay is all sort of has the same water characteristics. And then sort of that broader project of the tides, of sort of taking all of those position and depth measurements and trying to extract essentially a tidal model of the bay, sort of get an idea of sort of like, so you could actually sort of predict sort of what the lag is between high tide at the pedestrian bridge or the Warner Street Bridge versus high tide at the tide gates versus high tide at the bridge over by the Amigos facility. So those are my sort of big overarching goals, but it is very early days yet, as we only just have something in the water, a week. So here's my student who was very proud of getting the buoy in the water. And that's really sort of all I have in terms of sort of formal presentation, but I would love to sort of get your input in terms of sort of how you think sort of this project could benefit from your assistance, or what I could do to sort of benefit you and y'all. So please ask questions, speak up, give me sort of suggestions. I would love to take them.
Thank you, first of all, Dr. Hoecker-Martinez. Yeah, if anyone wants to have questions first, and then we can probably get into a discussion later after questions about possible volunteer opportunities. I know I had a question. What interested you in Bolsa Chica, or how did you decide to use Bolsa Chica as your outdoor lab for your place of study?
So, part of it is simple sort of geographic proximity. Basically, sort of it's a big enough body of water that I'm hoping there actually could be sort of interesting dynamics. So I am really hopeful that there's enough sort of heat going into the two bays that actually will cause some sort of some additional some increasing salinity in the bays, and actually sort of watching that outflow is actually really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. The dynamics, the scale of the bay is small enough that at least like the region sort of the regions are small enough that they might be amenable sort of various scales of computer modeling. So the hard part of modeling the ocean is that the mixing happens at like the millimeter scale, but the flows can happen, at the tens or hundreds of kilometer scale. And so, but Bolsa Chica is small enough that at least sort of like it seems plausible that you could try and model what's happening maybe in the channel that sort of goes between the Warner Avenue Bridge and sort of the wider portion of Bolsa Bay, and actually sort of have a shot at having a meaningful model. It also has, it's geographic. I guess it's geographically interesting. It has sort of interesting it has those culverts that sort of add restrictions and sort of add. And it also has sort of the two sort of regimes where you have both a massive, you have this massive flood control channel that can dump huge amounts of water in sort of, right, and it's coming off of sort of drainage off the streets. So you actually get this sort of this hit pulse of fresh water. It creates this sort of natural experiment every time it rains that I think would be really interesting to look at. So it's small enough that me and my students can sort of handle it on our own, but it is varied enough that there's sort of different kinds of phenomena can occur all in the same place.
Very cool. Thank you. Yeah, and if anyone else has questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
I have one. So is the size and the constriction of the water, is that why you decided not to go into the full tidal basin?
So part of it is also just a matter of scope of what I am capable of supporting right now.
Okay.
So so this would be, I think, I mean, I would like to sort of have a longer term sort of observatory sort of going on. Like my hope is sort of to establish with sort of an ongoing relationship with California Fish and Wildlife, where sort of I can keep a couple buoys in the water sort of more or less year round. And so that way we'd have a multi-year sort of time series of what's going on in terms of what's coming in and what's going out, temperature and salinity wise. And as the project sort of expands, it was you out into the harbor or out into wildlife refuge, Klamath. But I think it's the right size for there to be something interesting, and it's a good proof of concept if I want to sort of move on to sort of to sort of shoot for larger things.
Very cool. Kelly, I see. Yeah, Kelly.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to add too is we don't have recent data Bay. When they first constructed the restoration project, of course, they had data they were collecting for the first 10 years. Also had some students from Cal State Long Beach do some studies. So there already was some data for that body of water. And I was keen to kind of pounce on an opportunity to get data on inner and outer Bolsa Bay, which I really wanted to have data for. And you know, it would be nice if we could eventually get this modeling and understand, you know, how the tides flow in and out of Bolsa Bay, because no work has been done for many decades in that area. And another factor too is that the basin is frequently has a dredge operation, and now currently there's no dredging. I don't know how soon they'll dredge again, but that's another wrinkle that can get in the way with any you know, research projects. And in the past, you know, I sometimes will have to have people pull out their instrumentation before a dredge operator deploys, and also the current flow is a lot faster coming in and out of that inlet than it is in these other areas where Martine is working. So I think this is a good place to start. And they can
Yeah, the get the machine, and then we can sort of add bells and whistles as we go.
All right, questions, everyone. I can hear them in your heads.
I have one.
Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, Martin. Good to finally meet you. We've been exchanging emails for months now. So what specifically do you see our volunteers and your students doing in terms of measurements?
I mean, honestly, it would just be sort of going out and doing a periodic survey of depth. So you'd be writing down where you are, write down the depth, write down the temperature at the surface, and sort of do that survey over whatever the sort of reasonably accessible portions of the waterway are. So like my lowest level ask would be like because I know a bunch of the groups like you guys and some of the other groups that benefit the bay will do like cleanups and stuff. And so you could simply dedicate one person who sort of not really would go along with the cleanup and just sort of survey, get depth surveys along the way. So you'd have sort of, and so it wouldn't, my intent is I don't want to significantly impact sort of normal operations. Like it'd be the more it can sort of fit into sort of pre-existing habits, the better off it is. Cause like I said, so like, I mean, like the gear I have for sort of taking the depth surveys it's pretty simple, right? It's, you know, a pencil, some waterproof paper, and then like $200 worth of electronics, which is not absurd.
That's great. We're very excited because, as I was mentioning before, our current community science, we're citizen science, we're not calling it community science, program is on hold. And we have in this group built a legacy or a strong foundation for this kind of program to grow. So we can start with something as, you know, what you described by combining the survey activities, the basic survey activities that you mentioned, into whatever we are already doing at the Bolsa Chica. But for us as a group, it's a really interesting possibility to build on. So some of you might already be thinking in these lines, but if you have been with Flow for a while, obviously you're probably wondering what other measurements we could take, right? When we go out there and do the surveys for this project, in which we're focusing on understanding the depth and the flows of water. Of course, we could also be measuring other things that we might want to be trying to understand better, such as nutrients, right? Or we could be trying to also collect plankton in some of the sampling locations, which can function as a tracer, as an indicator for movement of water within these different areas of the wetland. And so there's a lot of potential for us who are constantly writing grant proposals and trying to really create a democratic process for science in a place like this, in which you have a number of people who are not scientists, but who are really eager to participate and exercise their sense of stewardship. So,
you know, and there are sort of intermediately priced sort of things. Because the next thing, like if I were sort of going sort of blue sky, sort of asking for, you know, the moon and the stars, it would be getting it so you would have your hands on a device that would actually automatically log temperature, salinity, and depth, or actually temperature, conductivity, and depth. And so you would simply lower, you would pick a location, lower it to the bottom, bring it back up, and so you could actually get a one-time profile similar to sort of what the buoys do. And so instead of having it at like, you know, 7 points, you'd have it all along up and down. And doing that sort of along with the depth survey would be a really interesting sort of thing to do. But that is a pricier piece of kit.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about that. So we're going to have, so just so everybody knows, this is our first opportunity to actually have a meeting with Martin. It's the first time that we're actually having this conversation with him directly. We've been exchanging emails, but we haven't really, so the idea here is just to build your excitement to the level that ours is. I know Tom and I and Amber and Jen and Gwen, and of course, Kelly already knows about this project. So all these people that I've just named, their excitement level is really high. And for most of you who are kind of completely clueless of what's happening, you're just like, so the idea of today is to just bring everybody's excitement up, because this is an opportunity for us. I know that some of us were getting bored with the flow activities towards the end. Anyways, before COVID, people were like, we've done this a million times now. Can we do something new? So this would definitely be an opportunity for us to be doing something new and meaningful, because in the long run, we can connect this data that Martin is putting together and the mapping that can be generated after the data has accumulated for a long enough time. We can then start understanding or trying to explain some of the ecological gradients that we see within a wetland. So these are things that we're going to be able to connect with things that we are already perceiving. How many times have you guys asked me, what is that foamy thing that accumulates near the bridge? What is that orange looking color thingy that accumulates in this other area? Why do the birds like to eat more on this side than on that other side? Why is it that you have pickleweed more on one side and eelgrass on the other? These questions, we may actually start to try to think of them in light of the data that Martin and his team will be collecting. Not overnight, it will take time to put together all these maps, but this is definitely a really big step towards a better understanding of ultimately ecology within the wetland.
I definitely, like, once we're no longer in this era of social distancing, I think considering how much effort it was to sort of get the buoy out, I wouldn't mind sort of getting, if people wanted to come along and help sort of recover or deploy a buoy, I wouldn't cry.
You're going to have a wait list for that one.
I think once you do it once, lifting this out of the water is not that easy.
Oh, come on, everybody! Everybody, show your biceps right now. Come on, everyone! Everyone, show the work that we do. Come on now! Look at that.
We don't qualify.
We're ready. We weight lift. We can do it.
Like I said, well, so I could use all the like more people is better. Is basically what it comes down to.
Wonderful.
Right?
I think we'll get to more logistics in a second. I think a couple people still had a couple questions before we moved on to volunteering stuff, if you don't mind.
Oh no, please.
I think Jim.
I had a question.
First. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
sorry, Judy. We'll get to you next.
okay.
Jim Robbins messaged me that you had a question.
Yeah, we've had an ongoing question since about 1997 that we had an occasion. I was doing another project, and the fence had fallen in front of the tubes, the culverts. And when we pulled that out, it took hooking it up to the Jeep and pulling it because it wouldn't come otherwise.
I imagine.
Within 200 pounds or so of mussels and shells and things on that. And nobody's gone inside those tubes to see if the orifice has been closed up by marine life inside them, and the inner bay all like 23 or 20 of total water turned around. And if those tubes are plugged up somewhat, that's probably changing the health of the area because it's slowing that turnaround. And is there anything in your project that might help us determine any of that?
So yeah, actually. So once I get the two measurements that I would actually be able to give that would actually be really helpful to that. So once I have the bottom sensors in by the tide gates, and then the bottom pressure sensor on the buoy on the other side of the culvert, I'll be able to tell what basically the pressure difference that's going through those gates. And so, and then we can estimate I'll be able to estimate roughly the area of that inner bay. And so we could take the area of the inner bay. I can measure that how the height changes. So I can basically estimate flow. If I can estimate the flow through, that pipe. I know the pressure difference, so I know what kind of resistance that is actually sort of going on in that pipe.
Yeah.
So, and another sort of interesting, I guess your question is the other direction version of my question of, if I get a pulse of fresh water coming in through those tide gates, does it immediately influence the inner bay, or can it wash out to sea before, because of that restriction? Does the inner bay stay salty because but it takes longer for the fresh water to sort of work its way in?
Well, now we had an incident back probably 1995. There was one of those three season winters where we had 3 times the normal rainfall. And that was the Wintersburg Channel was in jeopardy of overflowing into a neighborhood. So we actually got some action out of flood control. But the salinity after that had gone down to 4 at the walk bridge where the south. Yeah,
the southern footbridge.
Yeah. So, and the tide and the input of fresh water, it was like the rainwater was coming down the Wintersburg Channel and filling up, and then the tide pushed it all back in.
Yeah.
And so we've had a die off of the sea hares and crabs. They just, the sea hares were rolling up and being pushed onto the ground like the wet football.
No, that's very much sort of one of the things that I'm curious about is how isolated that inner bay is.
And the department does think that those culverts, at least the culverts that separate inner and outer Bolsa Bay, are likely extremely foul. At one point, a previous reserve manager looked into maybe getting some divers to go in, but we couldn't do it because just of the safety considerations. There's a possibility of those things collapsing. They're so old that maybe it's just the muscles holding them together. But you know, one idea is somebody could simply stick a underwater GoPro camera, you know, from a pole or something. You could even do that from that little road or something and stick it in there, and maybe, you know, maybe get a look if the water is, you know, it might be, you know, if you have clear water conditions, maybe when there's a slack tide, you don't have a lot of flow, you might be able to stick a camera in there and look around and see what it looks like. That would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, we have a GoPro and a pole, but the thing to tell inside the tubes is it's awfully dark in there. I was looking for an underwater spotlight or underwater diver light.
If only we knew someone who had 900 hours of diving in this group. If only we knew anyone with experience in diving in underwater footage. Gwen is frozen, but I'm talking about her. She had her hand up, but she was going to say something. I think her internet went down.
No, yeah, the department wouldn't allow any diving because of the safety issue.
But she probably has, like, you know, lights that we could use, and
oh yeah,
and a combination. Gwen, are you back?
Stick it under.
No, she's still frozen. But
can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hear you.
Well, that's the thing is,
oh, okay.
You know, making all the contacts to get this done was
right.
Almost impossible.
And I think before we didn't have like a framework to operate from within, right? Like it would just be to fulfill our curiosity to find. But now we would actually have an incentive here as part of the program of the end of the research effort. It would be nice to know, right? If there is fouling, how much is in the air. So I'm thinking, do we need an access letter for that?
Well, it depends on what it is. I mean, yeah, it depends on what it is. I mean,
we'll talk.
Martin has an access letter, yeah. But I mean, I was so happy when he approached the department. I really seized the opportunity because, like I say, we just don't. I've been wanting more data and research in Bolsa Bay because it's, you know, there were studies done in the early, like 79, 80, 81, 82, the early 80s, and then nothing, almost virtually nothing since then, very little. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to get some real data in there.
We do too. Thank you for working this out. Gwen, you back. Did you have any ideas of how we can go snoop on those fouling organisms?
Yeah, so I thought maybe our USC Sea Grant friends might be here tonight. Linda Chilton and Melody Grubbs were going to try and make it, but I don't see them. But I think that all of the MPA collaborative members now have, or a lot of them were given an ROV, a little.
Oh, that's right.
I thought of an ROV. Yeah, you need an access. Yeah, you need an access letter from but you know, when I was in Marine Region, I got to be a tender for ROVs. They're really fun. So you definitely need an access letter, but that would be way cool.
Nice. And we I don't know if you know this, Kelly, but we just joined the MPA collab for our region. Cool. And so now we also have the contact for that.
That's great.
Stay tuned, everyone. And if you want to help write the request for an access letter, if you want to help contact the MPA collab people, let us know. We would definitely welcome leadership on doing something like that. What do we call this? The project, snooping on fouling organisms, or, you know, like how to, you know, I don't know. We got to come up with a funny name for this project of how we're going to, muscle paparazzi, something like that. So, but yeah, so anyone who felt, I see Annie's smiling a lot. I think she might become the leader of this project. Get some eyes down there.
It seriously sounds so cool. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Where are you, by the way?
I'm camping.
Yay!
I took a little mini vacation, so I'm at San Onofre right now.
Thank you for tuning in from San Onofre.
Yeah, I didn't know if I was going to be able to hop on, so I didn't register until I got here, but I knew that I was going to be really interested in the project, so here I am.
Yeah. All right, I'm emailing you right after we end this presentation.
Yes.
That would be lovely. So I think that would be a great way for us to get started. And then, again, any more questions?
I know Judy had a question.
Oh, that's right. Judy, where are you?
I'm right here. Well, I know it's extremely early days, and you probably have a time frame where it's just going to be strictly data collection. But what ideas do you have about application of this data?
So, I mean, sort of like the simplest sort of things, like we could, if we actually estimate sort of, like, could measure the tidal lens. So actually, like, we could estimate how much water is actually going in and out of the bay, both the inner and the outer bays. It would, I think it might actually help inform Cal Fish and Wildlife, because actually I assume they don't actually know how fresh or salty sort of the salinity range that is normal for that bay. And sort of like it actually sort of would help inform sort of any communication they would have with flood control, in some sense, to be like sort of like in terms of if there's any, I don't know how many control structures there are upstream of that tide gate on that channel, but it might sort of encourage, like, if we knew that inner Bolsa Bay was highly sort of protected from short bursts of fresh water, it might encourage them to sort of adjust how and when they sort of drain things. That would be sort of the most sort of applied version of sort of what would be useful.
Okay. You know, my interest is just to know, you know, for the biology, you know, in the bay, and because we have so little information. I mean, we can take a one-time snapshot, and whenever we do, it's typically, you know, salt water, but and you're typically not in the water when there has been a lot of you know, influx of fresh water, because it's not really fresh. It's going to be contaminated after a storm, yeah. And you don't want to be touching that nasty stuff. But as far as you know, OC Public Works, you know, changing the flow, they don't care. I mean, for the biology, I mean, they don't care. They're, you know, they're operating to protect homes and homeowner and property, and so there's not too much of a concern of what's happening to us. We, you know, we're at the bottom of the trough, so to speak.
Can I ask a question? Kelly, you might know more about this too, but I know the Army Corps of Engineers has been talking about modifying the flood control channel, and this is probably years away, but that would directly affect what we're talking about here if that does come to pass.
In a big way, yes, and that's another reason why this is an exciting opportunity for the department to have some of these data, because you know, we have a dearth of data, and this will help us have a better understanding of how any other projects could impact you know, the biota in the bay. And the Army Corps, yeah, they had quite a you know, the department had a lot of concerns about what they want to do, but you know, it all depends on whether Congress funds it, And you're right. It's if it happens, it's going to be many years down the road. But it would make very significant changes to that embayment.
Yeah, from my point of view, it would change the plans. It would just make the volume of water going in and out of under the Warner Street Bridge much, like there'd be a lot more water going in and out of there.
Yes, yes, and they're also talking about removing the tide gates too, which will change.
Yeah, that would
change things.
Be a big difference.
Yes, yeah. So that's what they're proposing to do.
And I would think that this, these proposals that we're seeing are, in a bigger scheme, part of the long-term planning for preparedness for sea level rise and change to extreme weather events, king tides that we're seeing are happening now. We're already documenting that these scales of time between these extremes are changing, and so we're hearing a lot more talks about that, and it's something that we're preparing for the next 10, 20 years. But as you all know here, those of you who have been dedicated to this wetland for more than 40 years, decades go by really fast. We talk about planning for 10 years. Well, that's what we got to be doing, planning for 10, 20 years down the road. Having this data hopefully can help managers to understand these proposals a little bit better, right?
Right, and we're already seeing the influence of sea level rise at Bolsa Chica, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. I mean, just today, I could see the impacts on the southern, the South Turn Island. I mean, that is badly eroded. Fortunately, we do have grant funding to restore those islands. We're hoping to, to offset sea level rise, but there's a lot more that needs to be done at Bolsa Chica to prepare for sea level rise. Right now, we're not at all prepared. So something has to be done. Otherwise, a lot of stuff is going to be underwater.
Yeah, and this project might actually help sort of tell the difference between erosion and sea level rise. Like, are you talking about? Is it that you're having subsidence, or are you having erosion, or are you having sea level rise? Right, sort of all three. Sort of, right. You're losing it on all three fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And so this might help sort of at least figure out what the brightest fire that you need to put out first is.
Right. And it creates a baseline. So for the others on the call, it creates a baseline for us. So if we are to start advocating for new forms of protection for the Bolsa Chica, again, for the next 10, 20 years of work that it will require, the advocacy that will be required to protect this. As Kelly reminded us, a lot of times the agencies are more concerned about the safety of the homes, other things, ecology, the birds, they all kind of come down on the really low in the list of priorities. And if we are to be the advocates for those priorities that we think ought to be higher, having this kind of baseline data set, especially if we could augment it, as I said before, with other data, it's something that we can show, the need for more research. For right now, of course, we are here being very lucky and taking advantage of Martin's own interest in the Bay for his own scientific exploration. So we are combining our need with a scientist's interest in the place as an outdoors laboratory. But if we are to advocate for more public funds to be put into collecting data for management purposes, having this kind of baseline is extremely important. It shows that there is a need for more information, because obviously his data will tell us what changed in different areas of the wetland with extreme weather events, or just with the general flows patterns of flow that we see in the place, with seasons, for example. Any other questions? Any questions about the science? So would anyone, you all know me, I'm gonna start my quizzes. So Martin explained how temperature and salinity will influence flow. What do we call, what's the word we use for this layering process in the water that we talk about when we talk about phytoplankton? Anyone? It starts with an S. Thomas like, no. So stratification, right? And I have a question for Martin on that. Is there like a threshold for stratification to even happen if we're talking about less than 2 meters depth? Would
No.
you expect? No, it can happen.
So the issue is more a matter of how long it'll last compared to diffusion. But
Okay.
I mean, it's so think about sort of like 2 meters is pretty tight, and you aren't but there really isn't, like, diffusion is really slow,
Mm-hmm.
and it's even slower for salt. So temperature, it's hard to get real temperature stratification in 2 meters of water.
Right.
But like, I mean, imagine like, I'm trying to sort of think of what would be a good version for to get it to sort of reasonable scale. Like, I mean, so you pour cream in your coffee, right? And say you pour really cold cream, and you pour it very gently in your coffee. And then you stick a straw and you suck the bottom of your coffee. That cream might still be cold, right? And that's only over, a few that's over a few centimeters.
Okay.
And so eventually your coffee will come to the same temperature, but it'll take a few minutes.
Okay.
Right?
So it's a scale. It's a scale.
It's a scale thing, right? So
Okay.
so on the but then the bigger it is, the time scale goes like, am I gonna get my power wrong? I think it goes like distance squared. So like you double the size, you quadruple the time scale.
Yes.
And so you get this sort of it doesn't take very much for till you actually sort of get there where temperature essentially doesn't get transmitted very far, and salt is even slower.
Okay.
Like you can actually take a tall sort of pitcher of water. Like you actually do this experiment, like get like a mason jar, make some salt water, put some blue food coloring on it, fill it halfway, and then gently put fresh water on top.
Oh, we do this experiment with our kids.
Set it on the shelf.
Yeah.
It will stay stratified.
Yeah.
And that's this distance.
Right. So it depends on the wind that you have.
Yeah, it depends on some mixing,
right.
But like honestly, like you can get stratification on
within
centimeter
a mixed
scales,
layer,
especially when salt is involved.
Okay.
Because salt just doesn't move as fast as heat does.
Good to know. So I'm a biological oceanographer, right? And we always talk about, it's the mixed layer. It's the mixed layer. You don't care about stratification within the mixed layer. So really cool to hear about how that can actually, we can zoom in and actually see that stratification within those shallow bodies of
mixing
water.
happens, like I said, mixing really happens at like the millimeter scale.
Nice.
So like you don't, like, you need the water sort of to do this, and then it mixes. So you need something to sort of force it to stir into each other. Out in the open ocean, yes, you have sort of the full sort of spectrum of waves going on. You don't have that in Bolsa Bay.
Very cool. All right, any other questions? We're getting close to 8 p.m. No? Did we all bring your level of excitement from not knowing what was happening to being really excited? I know Annie can't stop. She's like trying to hold her straw like this. I'm not see, but she's really excited. Okay.
Awesome.
You made my evening.
Smiling. Yeah. We're very happy. As I said, the official reason why flow is stopped is COVID. It's true. But the energy in the group was already kind of like going down. They were a little bored, a little it was
time for a revamp.
It was a time for a revamp, and lo and behold, here we are, with the opportunity.
So like the other bonus for me, so Redlands, we're actually really close to Esri, which is a big GIS. They basically do electronic mapping software, and I need a project to present. So there's master's students here who basically they do mapping projects for their master's project. And so I'm going to present sort of this as sort of trying to make the tide model, trying to make the bathymetry map as part of that master's project. And so if I can get extra data, I wouldn't cry, right? Like the student wouldn't mind. So it serves an additional educational purpose for me in addition to sort of just science.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Martine, for just sharing your project with us. We thank you for being open to our community scientists to helping you in however way we can. Yeah, and I think one last call for any last minute questions before we wrap up. Anybody?
No, Amber, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about what the plan is for the next few weeks. Do we have, did we decide, are we going to have speakers next Thursday?
I think we're going to be switching into a new schedule. So we're going to be going down to 2 presentations per month. And so I think next week we are scheduled, we're going to be having someone from the American Cetacean Society come and share. But then after that, we'll go into a 1-week break, and then we're going to be having a meeting this coming week discussing everything. But I think right now we're going to be slowing things down just a little bit, just so people can take a break if you have to get an appointment on a Thursday night, or if you want to go to dinner. That way it's a little bit more open. But also if you miss one, you don't have to wait an entire other month until the next one. So we will be slowing things down just a little bit. It was great during the summer while people were a little bit more free, but especially with our educators going back to school and parents with students going back to school, I think it'll just make a little more sense if we slow things down just a little bit. So we're going to be issuing a notice just to let you guys know. So you'll be looking for an email about twice a month with the link. But we'll still be in contact with everyone, and I'm going to be sending out Martine's contact info if you guys have questions for him directly. And if you guys are interested in participating in this volunteer opportunity, you guys can email me, and I'll be sending out the email and a recording to all you guys probably over the weekend, and we'll be getting things moving from there, which we're super excited about. And yeah, we'll be having occasional updates, housekeeping meetings to update you guys on projects that we're working on, volunteer
trivia
opportunities.
games. More trivia games.
Yeah, the trivia game.
The last game, I won 1,000 points just for showing up.
Joanna cheated, but that's okay.
If you guys want to send me just pictures of my buoys you go by, I will take them.
Oh, we could totally have a contest.
A
The
photo
best
go up.
photo contest of Martine's buoys. Oh, that would be really
So
cool
far, there's
to
only
have
the
on
one.
Instagram.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the most creative shot gets a prize.
Excellent.
So, but really, we want to make sure that you all understand why we're slowing down, right? Like it's being it was a little bit difficult to make this decision. We don't want to lose momentum. We want to make sure that you all know that we're still very much connected, even though we're not seeing each other in person on Fridays as we used to do. We're still here. So reach out. If it's a Thursday evening and you miss this talks and you want to hang out, basically I'm just saying I will hang out with you on a Thursday evening if you want to. Just send me an email. And then if you have ideas for speakers, people that you want to see, I've been asking for Leonardo DiCaprio for like months, and Amber will just not get him to come talk to us for some reason.
I'm sorry, Joanna.
All right. Any other questions, comments? No? Then in that case,
I have a question.
oh yeah.
For Martine, what are you looking at time-wise for your deploying of the other buoys? What is your goal?
My goal, I'd like to get the one in the by the tide gates by the end of September, maybe early October at worst, and then the area on the other side of the on the inner Bolsa Bay is shallower than I had initially sort of thought about, and so I need to think a little more about that one. But it'd be nice to get something in maybe November. So it's about sort of planning things out, because I might end up having to get a different surface buoy for that one, because the buoys that these big buoys you have back there, they require a certain amount of weight before they'll sort of they'll stay vertical, and so I don't want them to sort of to tip over and be sad. I don't want people to look at it and be like, that doesn't look right. I want it to look like it's supposed to look and not concern people. So.
By the way, the buoy was kind of sideways last Friday when I saw it. I took a picture of it, but I don't have
Is the water way down?
It was just kind of sideways. It was kind of leaning sideways. And I was going to send you the picture, but I don't have the camera with me.
It should be fine.
Yeah. I wasn't too worried. That's why I didn't bother.
They're full of foam all the way to the top. Like there's nowhere for water to sit in them.
So Kelly, you can get started on a photo contest. You already have your photo. You can be the first one to enter in our photo contest. Jen, where are you, Jen? Jen, Instagram moment. Yeah, there you go. Instagram program here.